Hi, welcome to Pop Culture Maniacs' podcast. It's been a while. It's been me, as usual, is Jean. I am Kieran. Jean, welcome today.
Thank you very much.
It's all right. Obviously, just talking briefly beforehand, you're enjoying a nice trip down Scandinavia.
Yep, it was tons of fun, except for the wonderful souvenir of COVID that we all brought back with us. But other than that, it was a good time.
Sweden had a bold policy of not bothering to lock down.
Yeah, the one thing I did notice is pretty much nobody's masking, nobody's doing anything anymore. So it was kind of bound to happen. We assumed we were going to catch it at some point.
Same over here. Not many people would mask up much. Anyway, let's talk about something a bit more fun. Game of Thrones, since a new TV series is about to come out, and I've started reading the fourth book. It seems like a good time to talk about the very popular fantasy show.
Yeah. Uh, Now that we're back in the swing of Thrones on good old HBO, time to dive back in.
Yeah, so, um, 8 series. So far 8 series. 5 books. Obviously, though two of them are so big that they have to be split up into two for the paperback versions. And well, Millie, when I first found out about Game of Thrones, I remember it was a Empire magazine just reporting on the news. I really never heard of the books before that. It was like reading up saying they got Sean Bean and Lena Headey for the show, and then reading up about it and saying, oh, actually, that sounds really interesting. And obviously, I think the show obviously really helped the popularity of the books.
Yeah, I'd never heard of Game of Thrones before the show came out, and I definitely dove right into the books. I started trying to watch the first series when it came out. I was very confused by all the characters, so I immediately went and read, I think, the first pretty quickly, and then I went back to the first series and watched it all, and I was hooked.
Yeah. So was I. I think obviously history nuts. I obviously liked it, especially for being a more, well, not I say historically accurate. I mean, probably more true to history than say other fantasies like Lord of the Rings, which is sort of, more clear cut good versus evil. That one of the things I really like about Game of Thrones is the characters are just so well drawn in both the books and the TV show.
Yeah, it, for all the complaints we all have about George R. R. Martin and his writing. The one thing he was and still is excellent at is crafting complex, interesting characters, and having that as a jumping off point for the series was perhaps their biggest strength. Um, and as I'm sure we'll get to the final collapse of the show, but as they got further and further away from the books, you could tell that the show's grasp of the characters was never as strong as Martin's grasp, and I think that was kind of the big disconnect.
Well, yeah. I think a great example of that this would be Jamie Lannister, because he was made out to be this real horrible villain at first. Like a character you can really hate, but then obviously as both the shows and the books carried on, he became a lot more sympathetic. We ended up knowing a lot more about his motivations, which I think just shows how good. Well, but when the show was at its peak and the books are.
Yeah, I mean, with Jamie, you've got a character where you start with him shoving a child out a window. That's the first thing he does. Like, it's such a incredible arc to go from that point to, you know, where he ends the series. We can argue about that particular turn. I personally think it needed an extra like 3 or 4 episodes to complete the arc, but it was such an incredible piece of writing to start there and to get him to a point where you're actually rooting for him. Like, I never thought I would root for Jamie Lannister, but they've created this character where you had to root for him by the end.
Yeah. I should say, but well, first interactions in as a seeing that he's shagging his sister, and then obviously, but then you get to learn more about why he did, and obviously he was known as Kingslayer, but we learned the reasons why he did his actions. It was well, I said, that unveiling of complexity of both character and obviously the situation of the world of state of Westeros.
Yeah, and the fact that it was a show and a story that was so full of characters who were, you know, tragedies of their own circumstance to varying degrees, that it really was able to grasp the audience and pull you in, because, you know, even the most horrible character, someone like Cersei, you could still see her trajectory and how she became who she was and what built her into that villain. And, you know, it's rare that you get to spend as much time as you got to spend with these characters and to see them grow, and in some cases change, in some cases not. But you could always follow that path for each character, and that was, you know, a real gift over the course of the show.
Yeah, I think as well, like showing like the sort of the good characters, you know, like the Starks. Most of them obviously made mistakes. They weren't flawless. So, and obviously that was partly their downfall was their flaws. They were like,
Yeah, I mean, the coolest thing about the Starks, you know, and having them positioned as, you know, your heroes against the Lannister villains, was like you said, they weren't perfect. They screwed up. They made mistakes. They made decisions that, you know, were bad, weren't great. Um, you know, then they finally got edges to them. You know, Arya was certainly a morally gray character at times. Even Sansa by the end, you know, was was pretty badass, and you didn't expect that from her from day one. And I liked that there weren't really purely good characters. You know, probably the closest you could get to like a purely good character would be someone like Brienne of Tarth. But even she made choices that, you know, weren't purely good.
yeah, yeah, so, certainly, certainly. Obviously, like I think book readers they like found like that Stannis was the probably a lot more sympathetic in the book, but even then he wasn't exactly foolproof. Seeing that well, not foolproof. He wasn't exactly that good, but seeing that you know he was willing to murder his brother through dark magic, and
Yeah, yeah.
I think it's something like they show like to succeed in Game of Thrones, regardless on what your spectrum is on the on being good or bad, is you needed to be ruthless, you needed to be calculating, you couldn't cold and calculating, you couldn't, as I said, having too much honor would be your downfall.
Yeah, and you needed to be able to think moves ahead. And, you know, that was someone like Jon Snow's fatal flaw, was he never really could see beyond what was in front of him. But then if you had someone like Cersei or Daenerys, they were thinking 3 or 4 steps ahead every time. And so they were the ones who had the most success throughout the series because they were able to see the whole picture.
Yes, yeah, and you obviously got so many obviously like cut Ty, Tyron and Tywin, they were so intelligent. They were, you know, some of the best political operators in the series. And you obviously got someone like Varys, who's interesting, sort of like, it, yeah, he was actually a really interesting character because he obviously wanted to do what was good for the realm, but obviously he had to be very careful. Hence why he didn't like just stand up. He didn't stand up for Ned Stark when he was betrayed by when he was betrayed in the first season.
Yeah. I mean, understanding the nature of the people around you was, you know, the key to staying in power. You know, and that's what Tywin and Tyrion and Varys and Cersei and Daenerys could figure out, was how people were going to react to them and what their moves could do down the line to set the right people in the right places. And yeah, the political chess of the show was always so fascinating because, you know, until the final couple seasons where everybody had plot armor around them and nobody was going to die, you know, you knew that if someone slipped up, there was a chance that they weren't going to make it out. And you'd have to watch each person moving people into the right position to see who was going to make it and who wasn't.
And that's why, yeah, that political intrigue was one of the big selling points of the book and and the TV series, and obviously it was obviously based on real history because I wrote for another website like the historical influences of Game of Thrones, and I'm quite proud of that article actually. So the obvious thing being War of the Roses, you can say pinpoint like certain characters who they're meant to be, like the last Targaryen king who was Henry VI. Cersei Lannister was like Margaret of Anjou, I think it's pronounced. And even the show, especially within the books, the history is so rich. You can see like the influences, like House of Dragons. It's clearly based on the Anarchy, which is the civil war between Stephen the First and Matilda, who's both vying for a crown of England. You have so much like the Doom of Valyria was essentially a combination of fall of the Roman Empire and Pompeii, eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Yeah, there's just so much. The Targaryens themselves, they were pretty much when they took over Westeros, they were pretty much like the Normans. They spoke a different language to the people they were actually ruling over and just usurped control.
Yeah, I mean it's impressive the amount of work that went into the crafting this world, and how it overlays onto us and our history, and it's incredible.
Hence why there's so much potential for various spin-offs as well. And I think a YouTube channel that are really good is called Civilization X. They do a lot of like the history of loads of different fantasy worlds. So obviously Game of Thrones, and then they also like Lord of the Rings, Witcher, Ring of Wheel of Time, Star Wars, Star Trek. So, and yeah, I mean, they were very useful for if you want to get to know all these various events in the park in Westeros' past.
I will definitely have to check that out. I've never actually seen that channel, but yeah.
Yeah, I always say the advantage the books had. I think is they were a lot it was a lot easier in the books to sort of explain like certain things like the certain historical events, the legends, and the religions. Because the show it's not quite as clear because obviously people know these beliefs. They don't need to explain it to us. Well, they do. They don't need to. Well, I mean, they don't need to explain it to themselves, but the audience might be a little lost.
Yeah, and especially with this new series, a lot of the inner workings of the Targaryen dynasty are definitely need to be explained.
Yeah, yeah. But it's such a rich world. There's so much potential for the various spin-offs. The one I wanted was The Long Night, and they did commission a pilot, but then that was the one that HBO decided, yeah, we're not moving forward with that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was, part of me was hoping we would just kind of leave Game of Thrones in the past, but the only thing I really hope for, and I know they've at least started talking about one, is that we could just leave all the characters we've already dealt with in the past and move on with new characters and new stories. And so I'm less thrilled about the potential Jon Snow series for many reasons, including that I think he's the weakest of all the characters that were on the series. But I find myself very, very intrigued for look at the Targaryens and that particular like incestuous pool of awfulness.
Yes. Uh, you keep the blood blue, inbreed enough, and that's what happens to the blood.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can argue they're more like the like ancient Egyptian pharaohs because they were pretty much they were super inbred. They were like marrying brothers and sisters off each other.
Yeah.
And obviously that led to a lot of genetic defects later on.
Yep.
Yeah. Obviously, I got like here's some of the other spin-offs the, they've got coming out. They've got like the Sea Snake, which is about one of the characters that's going to be in the House of the Dragon series. So it's he's being a famous sea voyager. He's in 10,000 Ships, which is about the Rhoynar coming to Game of up to Westeros, and as you already stated, and the Tales of the Dunk and Egg, which is I can't really remember too much. It's set 90 years before Game of Thrones. It's sort of like it's based on a novelette written by George R. R. Martin.
Yeah, it's more of a buddy story.
Yeah, and other things I like I like the idea of these are some of my own ideas. Something like back uh, UT, which is like basically Game of Thrones version of ancient China. I quite like the idea of setting a story in that would see what so far to the east. Well, there's just so much potential, so many different stories. You know, you've got like the arrival of the Andals, which is like the equivalent of the and the Saxon invasion of England after the fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I mean, HBO could eat out on Game of Thrones for for decades.
Yeah, yeah. So it is a merchandising juggernaut as well. I think at its peak there was so much merchandise you could get. There was like there was a video game by Telltale. I thought it was like an interesting story I've seen in it. George R. R. Martin talking about how the show was commissioned, and he said that one of the snags that nearly broke the deal was that was the commercial rights because HBO, if they brought the rights to the series, they would have gotten the commercial rights, but George R. R. Martin already sold a load of them for like tabletop games and stuff. So in the end, though, they came up to the deal with everything that George R. R. Martin made beforehand was grandfathered, and everything afterwards was HBO's.
That's a decent deal.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I thought. It's not so bad. And obviously George R. R. Martin's a lot. Well, he was uh involved in I think up to like season 4 of the show, and then obviously he's working on House of the Dragon. Well,
Yeah, I'm intrigued how much he's actually going to be working on House of the Dragon. I mean, I'm still one of those people who holds out hope that we might someday get a sixth book, but I the more HBO spin-offs they get, the less likely it's looking that we'll ever see a finished Game of Thrones.
yeah, so admittedly a joke I like to make. 2040. George R. R. Martin promises to release Winds of Winter, despite being dead for 10 years.
If anyone could do it, he could.
Yeah. I think if there was a case, would someone else be brought in to finish off the books? But then who's going to be mad enough to get the wrath of hatred if they're not? Um, yeah, the wrath of hatred will be if they're not up to par with the rest of the series.
I mean, the way I see it, the show ending lost so much goodwill among fans that anything someone does that's better than that is going to be okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah that I think the final 2 seasons. I think, as you say, aside from obviously running out of books to work with, you there were so many factors. George R. R. Martin wasn't involved anymore by that point. Of it, the showrunners, they were getting offers to do like Star Wars and the Wandering Earth for Netflix. So I think they just wanted to hurry up, finish the show to make those shows. And I think as well, with the final series, the budget increased, not became much more action spectacle, much more fan servicey.
Yeah, and it just it was. I mean, I could go on for hours about my anger over the end of Game of Thrones, but yeah, I mean, like you said, it was clearly a case of the showrunners Benioff and Weiss were done. They didn't want to keep doing it, so they just rushed to the end when they easily could have taken their time and gotten extra episodes. I mean, HBO was gonna pay for it, and they weren't gonna, hardball them. It was their biggest show, um, and it just turned into a complete disaster from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, yeah, because it's had so much wrong, as you say, plot armor, a load of characters surviving, some just things not making sense. It's like those final three episodes were like the weakest the show ever produced. And if you like look at the IMDb scores,
Yeah,
oh boy, they're like,
yeah, and it was clear by that point they really didn't care about the supernatural aspects that they'd set up, and it just was, oof, not pleasant.
yeah. I think it's, well, because another article I wrote was like on like what would happen after the show, and like saying because they're making out that it was a brilliant idea to have an elected monarchy, with Brad Brand becoming king, elected king, and yeah, elected monarchies did not uh, did not work in real life. They they either fell like what happened with like the Poland Lithuania Commonwealth, or if it's like the Holy Roman Empire, just one family, the Habsburgs, ended up dominating.
Yeah, and within the confines of the show, nobody would ever think Bran could be a leader of that magnitude ever. He'd be killed in the first chance.
And yeah, yeah, exactly. Like, and there's so many other things. It's like, oh god, I've forgotten his name now. Um, oh god, what's his name? The knight who used to work with Ty. It basically became the Lord of the Rings. Forgotten his name now.
The knight who used to work with who?
Ty, Ty,
Tywin?
Tyrant. Yeah, not Tywin.
Tywins?
Tyron. You know the
Oh, Braun.
Bron. That's it. Bron. Yes, because he became, some sort of sellsword upstart suddenly becomes one of the High Lords because you know if they because if you like read obviously the TV show does try and they do try and simplify things, and so the family trees family for a lot of the lords are being sort of trimmed considerably, but because they tried that and if they tried that in the books uplift some cell sort of one of the high lord positions, you know they'll be rebelled against immediately. They'll end because there'll be people with much better claims for the for the role.
Yeah, and they screwed over enough of the other houses too that I suspect people weren't going to be particularly thrilled for very long.
Yeah. So another civil war.
Yep.
Yeah. And as well, like the ending as well, like the North getting independence, yeah. But then you get like Dawn and the Iron Islands, they're so culturally distinct as well. Surely the next thing that would have happened is they would have declared their independence as well.
Yeah, and on the show, the only reason why the Iron Islands got involved with anything was that they were promised their independence. And then suddenly they don't get it. That's not going to stick.
Yeah, because they've always been a sort of troublesome region that they've been tough to conquer. Same with Dawn. They were the only actual region the Argon never was able to conquer all of Westeros. They were able to they they only joined the Seven Kingdoms through marriage.
Yeah, there were so many things left hanging at the end of that I mean, that could be an interesting thing to explore too.
Yeah, yeah, but then would audiences want that ending to be explored?
True, very true.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's so wonderfully written. And you obviously going with certainly with Game of Thrones. Obviously, they got quite a lot of big name actors beforehand, like Sean Bean and Lena Headley being obviously the big name. but obviously, so many of the actors have gone on to be big stars in their own right.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible casting coup, really. There were very, very few weak links across the series.
Yeah, so obviously you got Jason Momoa, probably now the most famous because he's Aquaman,
Hmm.
billion-dollar films. Oh, God. Macy Williams done very well. Well, we can go on for hours.
Yeah, I mean, you got Richard Madden
Yeah,
and Kit Harington in the MCU now.
yeah, and yeah. So many obviously, and obviously they were able to get some big names as well for later seasons. Like they had Jim Broadbent for a fairly small role, and
Jonathan Price, yeah.
yeah, just so many. Obviously, I think it was gave Peter Dinklage his career got a massive boost from the show because obviously he was a well respected actor, but obviously you know afterwards his career went into the stratosphere.
Yeah, like, and God, he was so good, and it really opened up people's eyes to what he could do.
Yeah, yeah, because I think because obviously he did X-Men. He was also in the MCU.
Hmm.
Yeah, and recently did that Cyrano film, which I wasn't a particular fan of, but um, he's very good in it.
Yeah, I mean, the opportunities that he's gotten since have been incredible.
And he's got a great voice. I can see him doing lot. Well, I know people have played the game Destiny, like beg to differ, but I think he'd be really good for lots of voice work. If he did like the Angry Birds movie, and he did the second Creeps movie as a voice role. I was gonna say, and with the new show, they've also got they've gone really full on with the casting for as well because obviously got Paddy Constantine, Matt Smith, and Olivia Cooper are three of the most recognizable names to me. And obviously, got Reese Ifan as well.
Hmm.
So yeah, just a lot of
And Eve Best too.
yeah, yeah, just so just yeah. So they're certainly spending the money on the new, and obviously they're going to have to spend the money seeing that this is a civil war between two factions that have dragons. There are going to be some spectacular battle scenes.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just looking at that trailer, it's just a feast of the eyes. Just the caliber, the production design, the new Iron Throne that's much more like the one in the books. The dragons look better. You know, the hair and the costumes look incredible. Like, oh, it looks so rich and so inviting to watch.
Yeah, yeah. I think well because you're saying like the production values. Game of Thrones is obviously probably one of the shows that really has kicked off like the sort of high end, pretty much cinematic television we've got age we're living in now. So many shows now have invested in their production values, getting these big name stars for various miniseries and other things.
Yeah, and the really cool thing though for me about Game of Thrones and or about House of Dragon and I guess the new Lord of the Rings series is that after we've seen such a pivot to CGI VFX sets with the new Star Wars everything's basically VFX backgrounds to have these shows that are very invested in practical settings than going out into the New Zealand or the uh, Irish countryside to like get actual set pieces that exist in this world. It's nice to see that come back into big budget television.
Yeah, so there is that physicality to it, and you obviously touched on something there. It because Game of Thrones gave Northern Ireland a massive boost for definitely a massive tourism boost,
Hmm.
It helped up with making Northern Ireland a more desirable place to film your your big your big Hollywood productions.
Hmm.
The other impact of the Game of Thrones is because as well, there have been so many attempts to be copycat to have copycats as well. Like after Game of Thrones, I think pretty much most of the major chat broadcasters and streaming services wanted their own Game of Thrones in some way.
Yeah, I mean the big one was Amazon spending $1 billion almost to get their own Game of Thrones in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, as I said, too big to fail.
Yeah. Oof. We'll see in a couple weeks how that
Yeah.
one works.
Yes, and obviously, I was because you obviously got loads of other things like Vikings was one of the big shows that was trying to hang on to Game of Thrones' coattails. You also got like Last Kingdom, so there was some of those. So a lot of them went more for the political intrigue angle.
Yeah, I mean it's been a cottage industry of sorts in Hollywood to try and get there.
And there have been some films that have not worked very well at all, like The Bastard Executioner for FX that only lasted for one season.
Yeah, I think so far the big lesson has been that you can't just buy pieces and create a new Game of Thrones. It's a much more complex recipe than simply just getting IP
Yeah,
and putting it together. And I wonder how much longer that's going to be a thing. I'm assuming House of Dragon takes off because I have no doubts that it will. But if that's going to really spark more push from Netflix and Hulu and Disney and everybody trying to get their particular niche in the fantasy realm.
yeah, yeah. What I was going to say, it's the old well, Hollywood never learns. They see something's become very popular, everyone else has to do it. They don't figure out think why was it popular? Why was it successful?
Exactly. And they just assume that it's because it was a fantasy epic, people want to watch it. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's a lot that went into its success, and you have to build your own story from the ground up.
Yeah. And again, they've just had such great source material to work with. You can't just jump um well, just make it up life. Yeah, well, Game of Thrones had just such great source material, and I think it's very hard to find something just that would be as equally as good.
Yeah. Or something that hasn't already been mined to tell a different story. I mean, to me, I'd love to see a big streaming service invest in some original fantasy stories. There's plenty out there, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's plenty of other fantasy series that they can work on that haven't been mined yet. Game of Thrones might have nearly not came to be because apparently the first pilot for the show was notoriously bad.
Yeah, they recast a whole bunch of folks.
Yeah, there was got a new director, pretty much reshot the whole thing. I don't think there's barely any footage from that original trailer left, and I think after this and the blood blood moon pilot also failing, Jamie Campbell Boa should just not he's not meant for the world of Westeros.
No.
Very close to not coming to be. Instead, reading books, because obviously a load of the characters have been were aged up for a TV series. I think because of modern sensibilities. So um, a lot of those like the Stark children, they were a lot younger than they were depicted in the book in the TV series even.
Yeah, and Danny was also much younger.
Yeah, she was 15, wasn't she in the first book?
Yeah, so thankfully she was aged up.
Yeah, I can understand the logic. Obviously, obviously George R. R. Martin probably being more true to life how it was back in our history. But again, it's more for audience sensibilities that's why it was aged up.
Yeah, I mean, really, the last thing we need these days is more of the sexual violence against women if we can avoid that, frankly.
Yeah, actually, that's because that was one of the most controversial moments in Game of Thrones was the marriage between Ramsay Bolton and Sansa because that was never in the book.
And that was really rough.
Yeah, I would say where I think people were starting to turn a little bit towards the show after that moment. You could argue that was their jumping the shark moment.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of where they really started deviating from the books, and it just got really hard to watch.
I would stand as well because both in the books and the TV series, she suffered a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and frankly, it didn't need to be as bad as it was.
Yeah, yes, because with Game of Thrones, they probably did make two of the most despicable villains ever put on TV with Joffrey and Ramsay Bolton. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the actor playing Joffrey was so good they ended up having to quit acting for a long time.
And he was such a fun kind, like comedic actor in something like Misfits, and then oof.
Yeah, I know. So some people just can't separate the actor from the character.
Yeah, but he did a hell of a job
I know.
being so
Yeah,
horrible.
I know. It's like it was a great moment during the Purple Wedding. I mean, he was choking to death, and you think of people probably. I think there are people all over the world cheering.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I would say I think Ramsey was even worse. I think he was an even worse in the sense as a character how evil he was.
Just evil and violent and relished the violence, which was the really horrific part. And also the show made sure we could see
Yeah,
like him being horrible. Like with Joffrey, it wasn't always as obvious.
yeah. I think the thing with Ramsey, but he was a lot more cut, uh, cunning and inept, not inept. But he's certainly more. He knew how to play the game more, and like
Mm-hmm.
it was so bad that it was only a matter of time that someone would have tried to kill him.
The death of Joffrey ended up with the Olenna Tyrell's great, tell Cersei it was me.
Yeah, yeah, that was yeah. Well, Diane Rigg, one of her last roles, but it was a damn awesome role.
She was so darn good in that.
I think, I think you touched on you touched on something there as well, because obviously the way the books were written, you read it like the chapters from a particular character's point of view. Hence, something like Renly and Loris's relationship was only sort of it was more just hinted at in the books, or it was, but in the TV show, it was obviously a lot more um, stated out loud and stuff. You obviously didn't. Well, I haven't got to that point yet, but you didn't see like Ramsay's torturing of got his name now. Alfia. What was his name?
Theon?
Yes, that's it. Yes. He didn't. Oh, I haven't read that point in the books yet, but you didn't. You have. If yeah, you haven't. You don't find out about how you got to see all the torture in the TV series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I was going to say with the books, um, a lot of the characters are a lot uglier than they are obviously their TV counterparts.
Yes. Yes, they are.
So like Ramsey's really horrible. He's meant to have like a real horrible odor to him, like Ty Tyron Keon. He like pretty much looked like he like aged 20 years or stuff, like aged a lot because of the torture. His hair went white. Rihanna Tuft's a lot uglier. Same like and same Tyrant.
Tyrion, yeah, Tyrion's missing his nose in the book,
I can understand it probably of that. It might have been also budgetary that and
yeah.
because having to do a lot of makeup.
And no actor really wants to be turned into an absolutely hideous beast if they can help it.
Yeah.
Except maybe Doug Jones.
Oh yes, but it's good at it. Because obviously they had some really terrific battle episodes as well. I think my personal favorite was the Watchers of the Wall.
Yeah.
Well, it's just so much we could talk about. We could go on for hours. Dude, how long do you think? Have you heard much about the buzz of House of Dragon before it's released, or is it have HBO just really keeping it under lock and key?
There was a screening for critics, I believe in New York and LA. So I know people have seen it. Obviously they're embargoed, but in terms of the chatter I've been hearing, it's not quite as crazed as back in the Game of Thrones days. Just anecdotally from people, a lot of people still feel burned by the final 2 seasons of that show, so they're not sure if they want to invest anymore. But most people I've talked to are willing to check it out and see what it's about, and hopeful that because it's in my perspective a more contained story. It's less sprawling. You have basically 2 factions. It's a clear story that they're telling, that it's gonna and plus because everyone knows how it ends already, you're not going to have that bait and switch we got with the original series. So I think it's going to do well. I don't know if it's going to do Game of Thrones numbers right out the gate, but I think there's potential.
How is there anyone? How long it's meant to last? Is it like how many seasons?
I know they have at least a 2-season plan, because there's already been talk about what dragons are going to show up in season 2 that don't show up in season 1. So,
well, I'm guessing it's not going to be quite as long as Game of Thrones, though.
Yeah, I would guess more like a 4 to 5 season run. I know they're trying to stretch. The first season's going to cover less ground than one might think, but it's a big epic thing, and they could just kill off this cast and move forward with new Targaryens down the line if they wanted to.
Yeah, but there are not many. There won't be many left.
Nope, not too many left.
Because I thought the whole point of this war, it was actually very devastating. It was because they lost so many dragons, which was the whole reason why they were able to stay in charge in Westeros for so long.
Yeah, and I think the dragons are probably going to be the biggest draw for people, because it's been a few years. CGI's advanced a lot, and they look really cool.
Sure, it will be a hit. There will be certainly interest because it's such a big property. Even if, as you say, people have been burnt by the final 2 seasons of Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
we'll see. Yeah, anyway, I think this seems like a good time to wrap up. So thank you very much for joining us, both Eugene and and to our listeners. But if you enjoyed the show, obviously please like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Like us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Hopefully we won't leave it long for our next podcast.